Terrific. Yeah, we're delighted to share Heron Park's vision for the reclamation of Ross Island. I'm Gary Keys. I'm the manager of Heron Park. My background is environmental engineering, solving complex problems with sites like this, mine sites, estuaries, industrial sites, and turn them into a new use. And I'm joined here with my colleague Chris Moody from Tetra Tech, where I used to work for about 25 years prior to moving over full-time to Heron Park in April. Let's move to the next slide.
Okay.
So Chris actually started with the Portland Harbor Superfund site about 25 years ago. And he and I and some of our colleagues were talking about how to solve some of the problems, particularly with respect to Ross Island, but also the Portland Harbor Superfund site. And Ross Island, of course, really faces some challenging interconnected problems. As many of you know from the excellent journalistic work that Nigel Jacques has done in the Willamette Week, Ross Island Sand and Gravel has not been performing on their reclamation plan with the Department of State Lands. Of course, there was various different property transactions, which now has resulted in the RV Pamplin Corporation, kind of a different legal entity, now being the owner of the property. Everyone knows about the cyanobacteria algae blooms that have happened in 6 of the last 11 years that need to urgently be solved. And we think there has to be a clear path for this to ultimately end up in public ownership. Chris?
Yeah.
So we think the solution is to reclaim the really deep, 130-foot deep former sand and gravel quarry using Portland Harbor Superfund site sediments and turning it into a nature preserve. Chris, next one. We think that there can be a lot of different benefits from this. Chris is going to talk a little bit later about how there is strong indication that this can be done in a safe and secure way. I'll talk more about also the funding aspects. The key thing is that the funding from the user fees that would be paid by the Portland Harbor Superfund site potential responsible parties would be able to do a very good job on the restoration, quite a bit better than what is currently in the restoration plan for Ross Island Sand and Gravel that they're not performing on. It'll also provide the funding for the algae bloom mitigation. Lots of excellent habitat improvement, both for in-water and upland. Part of the improvement on the restoration plan is going to be the removal of the industrial debris and the demolition of the former sand and gravel processing plant. It'll also provide funding for a financial assurance plan so that Ross Island will be well maintained in perpetuity. And we think that this also then allows a clear path for it to become a publicly owned nature preserve. Some other benefits is that it can also reduce taxpayer costs for the Portland Harbor Superfund site cleanup. And also there'll be very excellent air emissions reductions in comparison to some of the alternatives that would involve, say, sending material out to Eastern Oregon. Next, Chris. So this is our vision. Our vision is to reclaim Ross Island into a publicly owned nature preserve. But to get that vision executed and to develop a plan, it's going to involve extensive engagement with community, with tribes, regulators, actually PRPs as well. It'll take a lot of time. We're thinking it's going to be in the 2027 to 2028 timeframe in order for that plan to all come together. Next slide, Chris. And the reason why it's going to take such a long amount of time to get permit applications submitted is there's just a lot of things to do. And we're doing all these things all at once. They're interconnected. So we mentioned a very important part of the community and tribal input. We've only begun on that part. And it's a part that's super important it has already helped inform some of our plans, and we can actually touch upon some of those. Obviously, there's going to be lots of regulatory input and engagement. We have to also engage with many PRPs because, as many of you know, the Portland Harbor Superman site is all broken up into different sediment management areas with many different PRPs. So there's lots of different uh, engagement and agreements that all have to come about in order to provide assurance of the funding. We are in the process of developing the financial assurance plan, working with the regulators to formulate that to help provide assurance that the completed restoration will be maintained forever. We want it to go to a public ownership. Now that's kind of early in the stages. We think that is possible, but that will take a lot of work as well. And then, of course, we need to solve the algae bloom issues. We can talk more about that a little bit in the presentation. And then the preliminary design, and all that comes together into the permit applications, which we're right now thinking would be in the 2027, 2028 timeframe. That would be the DSL, DEQ, Army Corps of Engineers, City of Portland, some other agencies as well. It would all come together and also involve, very importantly, additional public comment process. If that goes well and we get that permit, then there'll be posting of bonds after that. Then we have to prepare the site for operations. And we're thinking that the operations would start in July of 2029. There's some possibility it could be in 2028, but we think it's more realistic, a little bit more contingency if we assume it's going to be in July of 2029. Heron Park would close on its acquisition probably sometime in that 2027, maybe 2028 timeframe. Next slide. So in terms of the community and tribal outreach, what we're observing is that this is a really complex project. And so it really requires a lot of in-depth discussion. And we hope that in this forum, we'll be able to get some of that. But we've often observed that it takes many hours of back and forth and exploration of issues and coming up with solutions and ideas. So we're kind of emphasizing small group in-person meetings. We are also beginning our outreach to tribal governments and to tribal members of the Portland community. Honestly, that is, again, in the beginning phase. We have a long way to go. We have come out with a website, heronpark.com. If some of you haven't seen it, it has some fairly useful FAQ section, plus some other information. And we're really looking for some other forums as well to do the community and tribal outreach as well. And we expect this to continue and evolve throughout the whole process, which will be, multiple years. So a bit about Heron Park LLC. So it's an investor group dedicated to claiming Ross Island. It has executed a purchase and sale agreement with the R.B. Pamplin Corporation to acquire Ross Island and reclaim it into a nature preserve. It's structured as an option type of arrangement. So Heron Park is not the current owner. It can, though, become the owner when it feels that enough pieces have fallen in place to go ahead and close on that transaction. So my role is I manage Heron Park LLC, and my job is to move this process along and to interface with our investors. There obviously has been some question about who the investors are. I think the investors may be willing to go public at a later date as things develop more in terms of the process. Tetra Tech is a team member, an advisor for Heron Park. And of course, Chris and I worked together for years on this. And also there have been some questions about who the investors are, and just a couple of things. There was a question about whether or not this was the potential responsible parties behind Heron Park. And I can affirm that that is not the case. There are no PRPs that are investors in Heron Park. Also, there's a question about whether or not they're foreign. No, they're not foreign. So, with patience, I think we'll be able to disclose more over time. Chris, next one. So Chris is going to handle the next section. So he'll handle the middle of the presentation, the technical parts, and then I'll come back and handle the last third. So Chris, this is yours.
Yeah, great. I just want to introduce myself to Chris Moody. I've been here in the Portland area since 1998, and the first project I had was sampling sediment in the Portland Harbor from '98. So I've been doing this for a while, and Tetra Tech has been doing this longer than I have. It's been really encouraging to see the expertise that the company has across a bunch of different areas. Not only just the sediment cleanup and investigation, but the reclamation and restoration parts of the company. I've learned quite a bit from that, and so this first picture here is restoration of and reclamation of this wetland area with contaminated sediments. There's some dredging that we've been in touch with, and there's some restoration designs that we've done here in the Northwest and constructed as well. So what has to happen? There's a lot, as Gary alluded to. These are kind of the major topics that Tetra Tech will be working with Heron Park to implement over the next several years. Following permit approval, there's still some steps to get that in the door, but following the permit approval, we'll work with Heron Park to complete what's in the 2023 reclamation plan. That'll be kind of one of the first things out of the gate. And I'll go into more detail in that in a later slide. Above and beyond that 2023 plan, we'll work to remove old infrastructure. You can see a couple of photos there, and there's a lot of material. It's 100 years of industrial site on the island, and it needs to come out. And the 2023 reclamation plan did not cover it, but Heron Park has committed to removing that. We'll also be reviewing existing conditions of the shoreline and the underwater slopes to ensure seismic stability and collect data, as we need to confirm that what do we need to do to design and construct a cap over the Superfund site sediments. And Gary's going to talk a little bit about the financial assurance plan to make sure everything is completed and maintained. So we talked about there's a lot to do here. This is in order to develop the reclamation plan and submit a permit application to the DSL, a number of scientific studies need to be conducted. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of what needs to happen, but is influenced by the existing studies that have been conducted in the lagoon and upland, and which show that the caps as designed in that part of the site have been working effectively. So these are some of the top points, requirements of the 2023 Department of State Lands permit. And so I'll go over kind of what the top issues are, and I'll point out some features on the figure on the right. They were required to, or are required to, place 500,000 cubic yards of clean fill by 2033, and to date, they've placed 50,000 of those 500,000 yards. They are required to remove invasive plants, and that hasn't happened, and neither has planting of the native plants as required by the permit. Importantly, as part of the permit, a reclamation bond was supposed to be posted. That has not been done, and that, amongst other things, led to a penalty $13.9 million penalty by the DSL. And so this is the lagoon area. North is to the left on this photo, and this is where the operations of the facility were on Hardtack Island. And the colored areas here are really where sediment has been placed thus far in the lagoon. So in and amongst the placement of the sediment in the lagoon, Heron Park will be hiring a team of folks to help throughout the year. So outside of the work window, November to June, during the trying to front load this as well, we work to remove all that industrial debris. There's a couple pictures of that. A lot over the water, so it's not going to be easy to do. Some very large equipment, and so it'll take a bit of effort to do this. It probably takes several years to go through this and get this all cleaned up and graded. And Heron Park has committed to staffing this with some local year-round jobs. If the folks that are out there doing the sediment placement then would switch and do other tasks outside of the work window. And that goes to habitat restoration as well. So some of the same folks would be employed to restore some of the parts in accordance with the 2023 reclamation plan to improve salmon habitat, remove those invasive plants and plant those native plants per the plan. And what I think was really exciting is Gary and Heron Park have committed to developing some training materials and education to support a career path for environmental professionals and restoration staff. And I think providing that training and providing a pathway to a career path that I find rewarding myself, I think would be exciting to participate in. So what has been done thus far? Maybe there's some questions about what's been done thus far. I'll talk about the bullets on the left, and then I'll switch over to the figure on the right. So in accordance with the permit at the time, there were 5 confined aquatic disposal or CAD cells constructed between 1992 and 1998. That consisted of about 160,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediments from the Port of Portland. That was in and amongst other contaminated sediments, but those were the CAD cells that it was designed to be there. Now, during the placement of the material, the lagoon was still being mined at the time, surprisingly, right? And one of the mining activities rigs got too close to existing CAD cell 5, and so they took some material and that undermined the CAD cell, and it was breached in 1999. And once that was noticed, there was a big cleanup that was required by the DEQ that was implemented, and it existed of some capping both upland and in water. Once that was verified to be complete, DEQ issued no further action determination in 2011. And one of the things I think was when I started really looking at this opportunity is that there's been 10, 20, 30 years of monitoring data of these contaminated capped areas that have proven that there's no migration beyond the CAD cells and through the capped area. So I think that's really encouraging news from that standpoint. So let me go into the figure a little bit. Again, here you see the lagoon area, and the green areas are what were those confined aquatic disposal cells. The red area is the area that, through further testing, indicated that area also needed to be capped. It wasn't just the CAD cells; it was the area in amongst the CAD cells that had elevated concentrations. That whole area in red was capped and remains capped. And it's showing again that it's successful and working as intended. The other material up here, there was material that was dredged after that breach, and that material was tested and put into a certain area of the island and capped and remains capped as well. So the other thing I think is a lesson learned we want is to, we got to protect these caps. And I'll have a bathymetry map here in a little bit, but they're in areas that are seismically vulnerable, to put it bluntly. And this approach of placing material will buttress those existing CAD cells and reduce that vulnerability. So here's a conceptual cross section. Just orient everyone here. This is to the east. So if you're standing on the west bank looking east, and we cut a magical hole through the island, and you'd be looking at the lagoon here. So on the right is upstream part of the Willamette River, and to the left is the downstream part of the Willamette River. And this hatched area shows existing fill that's been placed over the years, and you can kind of see where those CAD cells are. We drew in a little area where the CAD cells in up. So it's pretty steep slopes, but the idea is to place material in really the deepest part of the lagoon that's up to 130 feet deep, and then place a cap similar to the cap that's been operating as designed. And the caps that would be similar to the caps would be implemented in Portland Harbor over these materials. And one of the important pieces, and one of these that makes this spot just really fantastic for this opportunity, is that the elevation of the cap is going to be below the river level on the upstream and downstream and on the outside. And one of the things I think is important there is that when you were to look at a CAD cell in the river, it may not be as quote protected as it would be within the lagoon. And so with the placement of that material, we will reduce that seismic vulnerability, and we'll design the cap similar to the caps how they're being designed in Portland Harbor. And here's that bathymetry photo. Really, we color coded it because it's kind of hard to see here. But the deepest areas of lagoon are kind of on this northern area. That's everything in red is between 110 feet and 130 feet deep. This is a water depth. And the orange is up to 90 feet deep in water depth, yellow 70, the blues and 50, and the green. This is the important part. The green, all this area that's colored is still below roughly the outside of the river elevations on the outside. The other thing that's important here, we drew on where those CAD cells are. Here's about where CAD cell 5 is. And you can still see these areas where you have really a lot of tight contour lines represent where there's a very steep slope. So there is one that needs to be addressed. Even over here, there is some slopes, not as much steep as in where CAD cell 5 is, but it's still pretty steep. So how are we going to actually place the materials? Now, this is not designed yet, but this is the discussion that has been had thus far with the resource agencies, and the ultimate approach would be based on what's in the permit. But the idea is, again, this is why this is a very unique opportunity here for placing of the materials. We can essentially close off that opening between 300 and 400 feet, depending on, or 300 or 600 feet, depending on what the water elevation is, and close that off. And then where we'll be placing materials at one point or another in the lagoon, we'd have another turbidity curtain that we'd place across there. So the idea is that a tug and a loaded barge would come in. We would open this gate and then close it, and then go through this gate, open and close, place the material, test in accordance with the permit requirements. Once we meet the permit requirements, open and close, and go back and collect more material, dredge material from the harbor. To date, the turbidity curtains really haven't been used very much during placement of materials by Ross Island in the past. They did some. They had a Tremy tube for some parts of it that was not very deep, and the turbidity curtain that's used now for HAB management is very shallow and doesn't go across the whole opening to the river, and so we would be using more robust and extensive turbidity curtains than Ross Island and Santa Gravel has been using. There's been some questions about the safety of placing material, non-hazardous sediment from Portland Harbor in the Ross Island. And I will say CAD cells have been studied quite a bit by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA, and are used quite a bit across the U.S. and actually across the world in managing these kinds of sediments. So we have a lot of existing studies to learn from, and we'll be relying on those. The other thing I think this is really encouraging, I mentioned this earlier, is that those existing CAD cells have been operating well and been capped and been meeting all the requirements for about 30 years. So we know it can be done and can be done safely. For those who aren't familiar kind of how this works, is that most of the contaminants that are on the sediments are associated with the sediment are there because of the sediment properties. So the fine grain sediments typically have higher carbon content, and it retains hydrophobic chemicals and doesn't let them go. It holds on to them and doesn't let them go. The other part that I wanted to mention here is, again, these existing studies show what a great opportunity this is that groundwater migration is evaluated and it does not seem to be a concern, or we can manage that effectively. And because that's going to be so deep, it reduces the flood scour risk. And there's not going to be any of that. And the island's going to protect it in the long run. And so with that, I will turn it over to Gary to talk about the ideas on the HAB mitigation.
Thanks, Chris. So first of all, we use this acronym here, harmful algae bloom, but in actuality, it's not just algae, it's really cyanobacteria that is the key thing that causes the toxicity. But we just use the term HAB because it's so short. And it's a really important part of the plan. We view that there's three parts to it from a phasing standpoint. There's the part prior to implementation of the vision. Let's say that's between now and 2028. And then there's a second phase, which is during operation. So that would be something like 2029, 2040, which will show a schedule and timeline later. And then, very importantly, is the period after completion of the nature preserve. All those have to be addressed. Chris, next one. So we've been evaluating the HAB mitigation alternatives. We want to do some pilot tests of multiple technologies in the summers of 2027, 2028. We are looking at the possibility of doing something also in 2026. That wasn't our original plan, but this is one of those instances where we're being responsive to the community input, seeing what we can do this year. considering that's going to have, potentially an El Nino effect, and the sooner that we can try and mitigate, the better. We've had engagement with Oregon State University and the Human Access Project about the pilot testing, gotten some good feedback, and we're going to see what we can do again, primarily in 2027, 28, but maybe in 2026. And we also envision that during the operation phase, that the HAB mitigation is going to be optimized, and that will then allow a clear idea on how to then implement the HAB mitigation long-term after this becomes a nature preserve. And as Chris mentioned, the financial assurance plan, which will be funded by Heron Park, will provide an endowment. It's actually called a post-closure care trust, but people call it an endowment. This is kind of similar. And that'll provide funding for HAB mitigation in perpetuity. Next slide, Chris. Another thing that we listen to with respect to community feedback is the importance of air emission reduction. And we anticipate that the Ross Island concept would reduce air emissions by over 99%. The second and third bullets actually are some of the key parts of it, and I don't want to take credit for them because it's just simply because Ross Island has favorable geography. It's 20 times closer than, or even 30 times closer than some of the alternatives in Eastern Oregon, but also quite significantly, because Ross Island Lagoon is connected to the Holgate Slough, we can actually bring the tugboats right into it, which means there won't be the need for truck or rail transportation, which produces a lot more emissions than tugboats on a per ton mile basis. But we decided to go further than that. So the tugboat, at least one, is going to have a special diesel particulate filter or be of a very high performing type of new tugboat that is now required down, let's say, in the Port of Long Beach, Port of Los Angeles, where there's very, very high emission restrictions. And we're going to utilize an electric utility boat to open and close those turbidity curtains that Chris talked about. I think public safety is another thing that we've heard as a concern. It's been reported that there could be as many as 200,000 truck trips. And that would probably apply even if there is some portion of the distance that's handled by barge. But Ross Island, as I mentioned, would avoid all truck trips for the transporting of the sediments that would be sent to Ross Island. And tugs and barges this is actually really interesting information from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Tugs and barges are like enormously safer to the public than truck transport and even safer than rail. So 6,000 times safer to the public than truck transport and 400 times safer than rail. Then there's going to be benefits to taxpayers and ratepayers. So the state, the city, and utilities all are potentially responsible parties for the Portland Harbor Superfund site cleanup. And we envision that the Heron Park approach is going to save them very substantial costs. And so that would benefit those entities and indirectly their stakeholders, taxpayers and ratepayers. Furthermore, Heron Park plans to donate the reclaimed Ross Island Nature Preserve to a public agency. That's our hope. And furthermore, we would endow it with a post-closure care trust, so it shouldn't become a liability in the future for that public agency. So I think the overall plan is quite beneficial to the community. Next, Chris. We've heard concerns. Some of these questions have come in to us from the comment section on the Heron Park website. And so we heard about concern about the abandoned and derelict vessels. Heron Park really wants this to be solved. Heron Park wants to be a very proactive, cooperating property owner, and to work with the agencies that have jurisdiction over this. And first and foremost, the Department of State Lands is the lead agency for the abandoned and derelict vessel program. But in addition to that, Heron Park wants to work with neighbors and other stakeholders to collaborate on how to address this issue. And certainly from the standpoint that on its private land, when Heron Park becomes the owner, Heron Park will definitely be removing trash and debris, uh, uh, just like it's going to be removing all that industrial debris. The debris that's left over from the derelict vessels will, all be part of cleaning up the islands and preparing it to be a beautiful nature preserve. Uh, Chris? So thinking about schedule, again, just want to emphasize there's a lot of work to be done before Park's plan is developed and submitted to the regulatory agencies. There's going to be a lot of engagement with community and tribes to inform that plan. We've already been listening, already been making changes to the plan, and expect to keep on doing so. We also need to be responsive to the Portland Harbor Superfund Site PRP timelines and the EPA's timelines, because that's where the funding comes from. So let's move on to the next one. Next slide. This just illustrates how there are different sediment management areas with different schedules. Most of them are around the 30% design. Some have gone a little bit further. And so we're going to need to work with each of these groups to accommodate their schedule. So this then leads to the next slide, which is our conceptual timeline. And we're just kind of grouping it into blocks of time, because there's obviously some uncertainty as to specifically when things will start or end. So again, we're anticipating that there's a permitting and preparation phase between now and when operations would begin in July of 2029. During that time, we'd be doing the community and tribal engagement in all those years. We'd be doing the PRP engagement and getting commitments on the volumes that would be sent, regulatory engagement, developing the financial assurance plan. Then later in the next part of that, we'll be including preliminary design based on the volumes that are committed from the PRPs. And in that time frame, we'd also be looking at Heron Park closing on the acquisition of the property. And then we would have that formal phase where, based on all this input, we would then be developing a final plan, submitting that to the agencies, which includes DSL, DEQ, Army Corps of Engineers, city, and some others. And during that time, there are public comment processes. So that's just in addition to the engagement that we're anticipating doing. We anticipate the community and tribal engagement will keep on going. And then after the permits are approved, we'll go into Heron Park posting reclamation bonds. This will provide assurance that the reclamation will be completed. And then we're preparing the site for receiving sediments. So then we go into the next phase, where we're going to front load the implementation of the reclamation scope of the 2023 DSL permit with Ross Island Sand and Gravel. We're not going to wait. We're going to do that on the early side. And we'll also be in the early phase, also doing demolition and debris removal, and continue with the HAB mitigation. Later on in the process, as soon as we can, we'll be constructing the cap in the areas that are finished. We're not just going to wait till the very end. We'll do areas where we can. And then we'll complete the reclamation plan, continue the HAB mitigation. And then somewhere in the 2041 timeframe, maybe a little bit earlier, we don't know exactly yet, we expect that the nature preserve would be transferred over to public ownership, and it would be operated as a nature preserve, continue with the HAB mitigation, and then continue to have a cap monitoring indefinitely. So next slide. Yeah, so just to recap, Yeah, so it's Heron's Park vision to reclaim Ross Island and make it into a publicly owned nature park. Again, a lot of work to be done. A lot of that is going to involve community and tribal engagement throughout. We think that there is just lots of multiple benefits for the community. We also think that this is probably the best chance for Ross Island to get reclaimed because of the funding that we can then mobilize to do it. So I think that's the end. I think we now have the opportunity for Q&A. Kim?
Yep. Thank you so much, Gary and Chris. We've had a number of questions come along in the queue, and I've been working with the team on the back end to answer a few of them that were in the slides or categorizing them. So that's the approach I'll take for folks' awareness. Um, the first category of questions is just in general asking about Heron Park and Tetra Tech. We tried to clarify for folks that Heron Park investors are not foreign, but folks are still wondering where exactly are they based, and also the concern of the potentially responsible parties being involved. We clarified that they aren't, but if there's anything else that you want to add to those questions.
I don't think I have any more to add now, but I am optimistic that we'll be able to provide more information later.
Okay. The second category is speaking more to community engagement. You mentioned a lot in the presentation that you'll be engaging deeply with the community, but folks are asking if this will look more like informing people after decisions were already made, or if the community and the tribal concerns will have actual power to stop, modify, or put a condition on the project.
Well, it's a good question that, that would be asked, and I can understand it. I think our track record is already showing that we are listening to community groups and to people who comment on the website and to other engagement, also with regulatory engagement. We're already starting to incorporate comments and ideas in our plan, and we expect to continue to do so. We're very enthusiastic about doing that.
And then is Heron Park and Tetra Tech willing to enter into negotiations with the community and labor representatives to maybe co-create a community benefits agreement for the Superfund cleanup, debris removal, and restoration of Ross Island?
Yes.
Short and sweet, thank you. Around tribes, folks are wondering what are the tribal nations and frontline communities that have already been consulted, if you could provide more insight on that.
Yeah, so honestly, our tribal engagement plan is very early in its development. Right now, we're trying to identify who to talk to. And what we want to do is to meet with both tribal governments on their terms and have quality interaction like what we described. And also recognize that we need to engage with the tribal members that are in Portland, that are part of the community of Portland. So we're trying to approach all those. We had to get out, we felt we had to get out our website first so that we were able to present the vision. And now now that we've made the website live, we're now implementing on some of those plans.
Alrighty. If at any point, yeah, you could provide, folks are just asking for the specific tribes, and maybe that's a later conversation, but that's definitely a focus for folks. And if at any point, if there's a question that you have a follow-up to, just keep dropping them in. But I'm just going to keep rolling through what is already in. So the next one is, will Heron Park commit that no sediment will be placed in the Ross Island Lagoon unless affected tribal nations give meaningful consent through government-to-government consultation? I believe this one was partially answered by EPA, given that y'all aren't necessarily a government entity. It would have to go through a somewhat different process. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
it's correct. uh, I don't know enough about how that would work to answer the question, but we're intending to have quality communication and engagement and listening with the tribal nations and also with the tribal members of the Portland community and to incorporate those input into the plan.
Mhm. Thank you for adding a little bit more background. And then the last question I'll ask, and then I'll go to you, Doug. What would make Heron Park say no to the project, essentially? So would it would there be any environmental, cultural, legal, or community conditions that would cause Heron Park to walk away from essentially reclaiming tribal and ancestral lands?
Well, I think that the question has been asked of us whether or not there are other ways to reclaim Ross Island besides using Portland Harbor Superfund site sediments. So one of the questions was, would Heron Park uh, proceed if the placement of Portland Harbor Superfund site sediments was not allowed? We've looked at the possibility of mitigation banking, but we really don't think that there is another source of funding that can achieve the goals that the community is going to want and what the regulators are going to require. So if the Portland Harbor Superfund site sediment concept was not approved, then I don't think Heron Park would close on the transaction and would say, we don't have, we can't do it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Gary. Some folks have noted that Tetra Tech has been maybe in the violation tracker and has extensive, maybe a bad reputation as their research that they're seeing, and they just want to know if um, if this will like interfere or if they're just concerns in general about the bottom line. Okay.
I guess the characterization of bad reputation is probably a judgmental one, an opinion, as opposed to something that I would agree with. I think that I would point out that the TEDRC has a very extensive clientele, includes the federal government, includes the EPA, includes the Department of Defense, includes many, many agencies that continue to find Tetra Tech to perform in a very excellent way. So I think whoever was suggesting that was probably taking one item and putting it into I don't know, a context, making it into a big deal. Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that particular statement, but uh, the independent parties not associated with Tetra Tech that were found to be guilty in a court of law are currently in jail spending time, and Tetra Tech was absolved of any concern in that matter. So it's kind of a done deal from the federal government standpoint and the clients that we work for.
So, Chris, I'm not sure if I would characterize Bing saying absolved. I think Tetra Tech acknowledged that some of its employees, this, by the way, relating to the Hunters Point matter, which happened about 15 years ago and was settled with the federal government, I think, last year, that there was some responsibility on part of some employees. So, but, Tetra Tech is a 25,000 person organization. And I think it's important to consider that in the context of that, I don't know, representation that someone made.
Yeah, and I wasn't there. And yeah, I can certify that I wouldn't do anything like that. So
Yeah, thanks, Gary and Chris, for speaking to it a bit, and I appreciate the honesty, and I hope we can continue to keep the conversation open whenever concerns like these come up for folks. We can spend about another 10 to 12 minutes on questions. So I want to move through other ones that were posed already. Last couple under permits and technical planning is Heron Park and Tetra Tech seeking permits to dispose of RCRA regulated sediments like PCBs and mercury in the lagoon.
Chris, you want to handle that?
Yeah, yeah. Anything that's in the sediment in Portland Harbor, and we didn't mention this, but we may accept other material besides Portland Harbor dredge sediment. Anything is in that it can't go to that would need to go to a landfill would be acceptable, except for the hazardous material that would go to the a subtitle C facility. So the kind of concept that this idea was built on, it would be the least contaminated material from Portland Harbor will be put in the deepest part of the lagoon and cap to control that.
Now, Chris, why don't you elaborate on one nuance which is talked about within the website, which is that we're also not going to accept mobile contaminants.
Yeah, that's a important one. There are some areas where within the layers of the mud at the bottom of the river, there are some materials like gasoline, like that flow and cause a sheening on the river surface. Those materials are going to be expressly not permitted to be placed within the lagoon. And so we'd work hard. That'll be a permit requirement. And that's what something that we're putting into that permit. And we will work with the dredging community that are doing the actual construction, the cleanup, to verify as required to ensure that those permit requirements are met, and other deleterious material is not accepted for placement.
Yeah. And then the last one is if DEQ's most protective criteria, not just the minimum legal thresholds, will be used for evaluating the fill.
Yeah, there's more to be done on that. You know, we're just at the beginning start of trying to work with the resource agencies, the DEQ and DSL and others to develop a acceptance criteria for Portland Harbor sediments, and more to come on that. That depends on site-specific conditions, which again I kind of listed some studies, scientific studies that we need to perform earlier in the slide deck, and that'll be part of it. Is collecting that information in order to determine that the material that's placed can be placed safely and managed safely.
Thank you. A couple about sediment disposal and environmental risk. A general question of like why the Ross Island Lagoon is being considered for the disposal instead of using existing permitting facilities, and what safeguards exist to prevent the recontamination of the river.
Chris, why don't you
Yeah, I think
that one?
yeah, it really is a very very unique setting, and we're lucky that this exists to be able to have this opportunity. It's very deep, number one. Number two, you can place material and cap over that and prevent migration from the cap material up through the cap into the environment. And also importantly, it's protected on really four sides. There's an opening there to the river, but there's a sill that's about, again, it's about 28, 26 feet deep, depending on where you are in the tidal cycle, the river stage. That's the entrance to the lagoon, and then it drops down quite a bit into 60, 70, 80, 100, 120 feet through that. And so that protects that material from getting back out into the river. From a risk from recontamination standpoint, the placement of the material in the lagoon with the turbidity curtains will reduce any release of that material on down through past those turbidity curtains back into the river proper. And it'd be the same sort of approach that the dredging is conducted with by the Portland Harbor dredging community. Did I hit all those points?
Yeah, maybe a follow-up is did you conduct a risk analysis or will there be one?
Have not yet, and that's the plan to do that. And I will say that the risk analysis that was done for the existing CAD cells in the lagoon showed that the cap, as designed, could reduce and prevent any material from leaving the capped area.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm doing a little bit of switching gears here because we have had a number of questions that are more in EPA's realm. So if I could just call in Hunter from the EPA team to answer folks' question about what do EPA project managers think about cooperation with Heron Park on moving the dredged soil? Please explain how this plan is different from the prior T4 CDF concept. And finally, when does actual remediation of the Portland Harbor Superfund cleanup begin? Are we waiting for Heron or Tetra Tech to move on with their process? Hunter, are you ready to? Okay.
Yeah, certainly. So let's start at the top. What do EPA project managers think about cooperation with Heron Park on moving the dredged soil? I think that's kind of like a big conversation. But what I can say is, we're interested in seeing how this proposal moves forward. Ultimately, this is a proposal that's going to move forward through the state. For the Superfund cleanup, we have something called the offsite rule. When material is taken off site, we have to ensure that it's taken to a facility that is permitted, in good standing, and appropriate for handling the material. So if the facility were to come online, we would be reviewing it as material is sent offsite. Next question was explain how this is different from the prior T4 CDF concept, and CDF is confined disposal facility. So that concept, which EPA proposed back in our proposed plan in 2016, that was a facility that was within the Superfund site in a slip or an off-channel area in the Willamette. And one of the main difference is that it was filling the submerged land, or this part of the river, to become land, to make it into upland. So that's one of the main differences. That was making land, while this is filling submerged land that will continue to be submerged. It's aquatic disposal, while the other one was a upland disposal type of situation. Lastly, there's some questions about timing here. So when does the cleanup of the Portland Harbor Superfund site begin? We expect to start construction. So we expect to have agreements signed for cleanup in 2027, next year, and then get in water and start the cleanup in 2028. And then there's some comments about that schedule and the Heron Park schedule, and kind of some questions around, would we delay cleanup for the Ross Island concept? And the answer is no. We are going to start as soon as we are ready. We are going to use whatever facilities are permitted and online at the time that we start. And really, something I think to help clarify too is EPA is never picking one facility for this cleanup and saying this is where everything needs to go. It is going to be every barge load really is an independent decision of where it needs to go. And that might be landfills, it could be hazardous waste facilities. And so hypothetically, if this were a permitted facility, that could be a consideration depending on what material is being moved. But it's not a one-size-fits-all situation where we choose one facility. I think that was all from me.
Yes, so far. Thank you, Hunter. We have one more question to pose from the group since we're running out of time, and then Barbara, I can give you a moment too if you want to pose something. But this one's more about financial incentives. So does Heron Park, the investors plan to petition to the Natural Resources Committee with tribal members as active participants and apply for ecological credits that can be sold on the market and purchased by the PRPs to satisfy their cleanup requirements?
So it's not currently part of our plan. As I mentioned earlier, a preliminary first cut analysis indicated that that type of approach would not be able to achieve the reclamation of Ross on its own. So now the next question is, well, what about having it be supplementary to the main part of the plan? And again, it's still not part of our plan. And the reason is that we're very much committed to seeking to have this be a publicly owned nature preserve. And we think that trying to make it into a mitigation bank type of approach might complicate that. So we're still early in the process. We might learn more that might make that viable, but right now it's not part of our plan.
We answered lots of them, and there is still some that maybe remained unanswered for folks. So we will work with Gary and Chris to see how they maybe want to approach how we do follow-ups, and as well as with the EPA team. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if this is a topic that folks want to continue talking about as Heron Park progresses in their proposal, we can definitely make space for it at future